This program is intended for mature audiences. Parental discretion is advised.
My friend Marissa and her family moved into a new house many years ago. They were genuinely excited to finally locate a massive, historic home within their budget. None of us ever imagined there was a dangerous reason for its affordability. Weird shit began as soon as they moved in. Odd sounds were everywhere. We all heard cries, sobs, and even whispers. Her family is a level-headed bunch, so they assumed it was everything that it wasn't. Vermin, the house settling, movement inside a home that had been empty for a long time, drafts through old plaster. They knew the horrible smells that frequently wafted through the house had an explanation. The old sewer pipes might be leaking. A decomposing animal could be somewhere under the foundation. The doors didn't stay closed because they were old and probably just needed adjusting. The biggest change came from her big brother, Marcus. I've known the whole family for years. Marcus was always extroverted. He enjoyed people and laughter. He loved being the class clown. After he moved into that room, he ceased to be the guy we knew. He became angry and sullen. His grades plummeted, and he was kicked off the football team. He just didn't care. The family didn't suspect anything for a long time. I guess it was just the shock of seeing him become another person that changed things. No one understood what happened. There weren't any unusual stressors in the home. His relationships only changed when he changed them. Everything he dealt with was entirely self-imposed. They went through a pharmacy of meds to alleviate whatever was wrong. He began to see therapists, psychologists, and psychoanalysts. Nothing helped. Marissa's mom, Helen, was at the end of her rope. Luckily, she confided in a neighbor she'd recently befriended. The neighbor said to switch his room with the guest room and see what happened. Helen thought it was a silly suggestion, but she would have given anything a try to fix her son. We were all floored when we saw the change. He returned to normal within a few weeks. He said he wasn't sure what happened. He just grew angry and nothing could distract that anger in his mind. Marissa and I went with Helen to quiz the neighbor out. Evidently, she knew far more than she implied. The neighbor's name was Lucy. Lucy didn't want to discuss it at first, but once Helen told her the room change worked, she grew more talkative. The details she revealed, however, changed everything within their family. Marcus had inadvertently been given the room of the former matron of the house. The room was notorious for destruction. There had been 6 suicides in that room, alone. Helen went pale. The room was maddening, to put it simply. It either drove occupants to suicide or homicide, usually self-destruction. The house had a horrible history. Victoria Torrey Drake was the original matron of the house. She was married, but her husband was never home. He traveled for work until he mysteriously committed suicide in the old executive building in Bristol, Tennessee. Rumors said he was never suicidal before, but one day she visited him there. It just so happened to be the day he died. Further research proved it was at the same time. Torrey was not a good woman. She was curt and snide with her family, rude to neighbors, and simply evil with others. The house was in Baker Hollow, in Scott County, Virginia. Torrey kept orphans, but not out of the goodness of her heart. She used them as slaves. A couple of poor children who had special needs were chained in the basement or under the back porch. She treated her pet dogs far better than the children in her care. She kept it hidden well, until the truth came out. Even before the horrors of her barbarity were fully known, neighbors knew she abused the children. They tried to intervene, but it was for naught. Torrey was the richest widow in the region. The authorities couldn't do anything without clear evidence of a crime. Everyone knew something terrible would visit Torrey. It was just a matter of time. Even if she'd been the nicest citizen in the village, residents still didn't want to associate with her. They suspected whatever came for her would just as likely come for everyone near her, too. The children in her care were usually sick. She said it was because they seldom wore their sweaters and coats. They wore rags and frequently suffered from exposure, But she said since children played and got dirty so often, she didn't want to waste money on good clothes for them to ruin. Villagers would have burned the house had they known about the children chained in the basement and under the porch. They knew it was bad, but never just how bad it was. If the imprisoned children made noise, Tori delivered extreme punishments. Most of those alive when the authorities intervened had several missing fingers and toes. Tori's discipline usually involved cutting off a part of the body. No one kept track of all the children who suffered fatal accidents in her care, but there was never enough evidence to get her in trouble with the law. The community's assumptions were correct. An especially brutal strain of cholera broke out in the home. The children's weakened immune systems allowed them to die quickly and with little pain. Many just fell into a coma and never woke again. The community finally discovered what she'd been doing with the orphans. They also found the corpses of long-forgotten children, half buried in the old smokehouse. Tori lingered for an agonizingly long time. Her body withered and rotted while she was alive. Once she grew so ill she was confined to bed, they locked her bedroom door and left her to die alone. She eventually succumbed to the sickness. The community cared for the children's bodies first and burned their effects, as was custom with cholera. The community held a simple burial service for Tori at her home. Very few people could sit in the room with her body for any length of time. The burial services were held mid-summer. However, attendees felt an icy presence behind them as soon as they walked in the room. They came together and began the service. They stood close to one another in the hopes that there was strength in numbers against an infernal force. Her casket emitted an oppressive, inescapable feeling of evil. It flooded the entire room. The minister managed to remain longer than anyone. However, that was with much prayer and divine supplication. Everyone who looked at the coffin had the overwhelming sense that someone glared back at them from it. A strange, horrific stench followed her coffin that hadn't been there for any of the other bodies. The local doctor couldn't explain it. The minister discussed her life as a thick black shadow drifted up from the floor at the corner of the coffin. It appeared at her feet and grew in mass and substance. It became a black shadow of a person. The horrified crowd watched as it moved. It first crawled up over her feet, then her legs, and then her torso. Even the minister backed away as the thing came closer. The cloud settled over her coffin like a funeral shroud. The minister muttered a quick prayer as everyone left the room. It was the next morning before any attendee would approach the coffin. She was quickly taken out for burial. The episode with the shadow caused the community to have second thoughts about burying her in consecrated ground. They feared she would poison it. They buried her just outside the cemetery. The home was thoroughly cleaned. All fabrics and linens were burned. It sat empty for several years, and locals grew accustomed to the activity there. Passers-by still heard the rattling chains from the children in the cellar. A low and diabolical voice inside the home occasionally issued threats and made demands. Sobs and meager cries frequently came from the cellar. Smacks, slaps, and thumps often followed. It sounded like someone getting beaten. Marissa's family lived there as long as they could, which was about a year. They just couldn't take the activity. Later on, the community held a private meeting. They decided the land needed to be cleansed. The home was razed and the remnants burned. It didn't help as much as you might think. Everyone now avoids the land where the house sat. Sometimes, when the time is right, you can still hear Tori's wrath and the children who suffered under her tyranny.